for all the participants. So it's a pleasure today to be with you for sharing some thought and information about standard and labeling, which is really one of the most efficient policy that can be implemented in countries for producing energy savings and reduction in demand and consumption. So today we'll cover different topics. First one will be a review of the definition of standard and label, the rationale for implementations, the various implementation steps, then quick conclusions. So let's start immediately with the review of the definition of standard and labels. So energy efficiency standard, we find also very often in the literature the term minimum energy performance standard, or the acronym MEPS. And in fact, it's a set of policies or regulations with associated procedure that will prescribe a minimum energy performance for product in the market. So it has been applied first for white appliance, air conditioning products, more than 20 years ago. I would say now even 30 years ago, because it started at the beginning of the 80s. And nowadays it's expanded to a family of 30 to 40 products in several countries. So basically the objective of the energy efficiency standard is to get rid of the lowest efficiency product in a market. When we talk about energy efficiency standard, we must be careful because we see some confusion arriving in the market from two different concepts that are related but are quite different. The first one is the one that we just covered. So energy efficiency standard usually refer to regulations and policies to fix a minimum performance of equipment in the market. But at the same time, we see very often efficiency measurement standard or efficiency testing standard. And that's referred to a different piece of documents or regulations that will fix just the conditions for testing product. So that kind of documentation will define how you measure equipment, what is the setup, the procedure, and the main objective here is just to get with a single figure or integrated figure that will give you the efficiency of the product. Then you will use the results of efficiency measurement standard to compare with the MEPS regulations. So both are related, but it's two different concepts, and it's important to clarify this at the beginning. Let's talk now about the labeling, which is the companion regulations to minimum energy efficiency. So energy efficiency labels are informative labels, so you try to convey information to customer, either by affixing the label to the product or by printing the label on the box where you will find the products. So it's very often used for, let's say, a lighting product, which are relatively small products, where it could be difficult to affix a label directly on the lamps or small product like that. The objective of the label is to describe the product energy performance. So mainly you will find information about energy use. If it's not the direct value for the energy usage, you will find information about the energy class, so how the product compare with other products presently on the market. You can have information about efficiency or energy cost also that appears on some labels, depending on where it's implemented. So main objective is to provide information to customers so they will be in position to make better decisions to purchase equipment. But at the same time, we want to send a clear signal to manufacturers so that their product performance will be known by everybody in the market. And that's That's objective to push manufacturer toward production of better equipment is one of the most powerful element in labeling regulations. Let's just look at what type of labeling we can find in the market. So we divide normally a label into two broad categories, endorsement and comparative label. So endorsement label, as the name implies, will be affixed only on models that will exceed a certain efficiency level in the market. And at the right, you see the Energy Star logo. That's maybe one of the most known endorsement type of labeling. So we find Energy Star on a lot of computer equipment and white appliance also. The second category of equipment is the comparative label, where you will give some information to the customer on the relative performance of a specific equipment compared to all the other equipment available in the market. So this label that we see at the right is from Thailand, and it has a 6-star system. So that means 1 star corresponds to the lowest efficiency equipment you can find in the market, while 6 star will represent the highest efficiency equipment that you can find in the market. So it's quite easy for the customer just to gauge rapidly where the products stand compared to the offer from different manufacturers and distributors in the market. You have a variation of the comparative label that is widely used in North America, and that's the continuous label. Instead of star system or letter system, you just have a continuous band, and you will just put a small triangle that you can see here that will indicate what is the performance of the product compared to all the other products on the market. So for the Energuide system in North America, every year this band will be changed and readjusted according to product on the market. So the lowest portion of the band or left portion of the band will be the highest efficiency equipment that you can find in the market for each year. And on the right side, it will be the worst equipment for the, I would say, the previous year. So every year the band boundaries will be changed, which make the system self-adjustable over time. So there's pros and cons to each system, and I would say that currently the star system or letter system is the one that is the most spreading the most rapidly in the world. Look at now the design of the label. So there's different elements that must be considered when you design a label like that. First is the class system. Are you going to use a class like in the European Union based on ABC system? Are you going to use a star system like used in Asia, or are you going to define something completely different according to local conditions or culture, I would say? Here you have an example of customization of a label, and that's for Tunisia. And in Tunisia, there was a lot of market research conducted during the design of the program, so with customer focus group. And they just realized that the ABC system that was used in the European Union was not fitting very well with the cultural reference of Tunisian people. So for Tunisian people, it was much more easier to understand a label that is based on a numbering scheme instead of a letter scheme. So that's why they adjusted the scaling system from categories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 8 instead of a letter system. So that's an example of cultural difference. There's another element that is important, that's considering the coherence or other regional scheme or trading countries where there will be exchange of product. So in case of Tunisia, there is quite a large import-export activity between Tunisia and Europe. So they wanted to create something that was close to the European classifications, but not exactly the same, because the ABC classification in Europe was much more advanced in fact, the product offered in the market was much more efficient in Europe than what it was in Tunisia. So using exactly the same classification will result in a labeling scheme that will be a little bit hard in the market because all the product will fall in the lowest efficiency category, which is true. But they felt that in order to make the system more appealing, they have to adjust a little bit to the local condition. Because the current offering is lower than in Europe, they decided to shift the classification. So classification of 1 in Tunisia corresponds to a C in Europe. Then they will readjust over the time. But that's an example of adjustment that can be done while considering regional coherence with other systems. Other cultural preference could be the coloring system. So in Tunisia, they decided to go with a slightly different color scheme than in Europe. They used 2 languages on the label, so taking into consideration that there is a lot of Arabic people, a lot of French-speaking people also in the countries. And they also added some other information like consumer equipment consumption. And that's something that you should be careful about when you do focus group, because in several countries we realize that a lot of people confuse the energy consumption of the product with the expected energy savings. So that's 2 completely different figures, and it's not very clear for consumer which is what. And finally, you have to consider how the system will work. Is it a label that will be printed with the exact efficiency of each product where it will be affixed? Or is it a system like in Europe where you will have a base label and you will have a sticker that will be put on each individual product just to indicate what is the energy consumption of this particular product? Let's look at the rationale for implementation now. So first rationale is, of course, the huge energy efficiency potential that the standard in labeling can bring. So just in Pakistan, there was research made before the introduction of the labeling scheme, showing that 20% of the projected national energy demand over the next 25 years can be saved by introduction of several labeling scheme and standard scheme for several products. You can get significant sustainable market transformation using those kind of tools in the market. And that's a very cost-effective mechanism for delivering energy saving, GHG reduction, and you will have also significant gain for consumers and for the society as a whole. And I already mentioned that this tool can stimulate manufacturers to design and introduce in the market better product, more efficient product. Just to talk about the effectiveness of this kind of regulation, when it was implemented in Europe, the energy consumptions of white product in the market, that was for refrigerator, this one, was the red line here, which shows a kind of a normalized curve before the introduction of the standard. 10 years later, when you look at the product offered on the market, you see those peaks that closely match the threshold of A, B, and C category. And that's the same even for D and E. So that shows that manufacturers do care about the labeling system, and they in fact organize or change their design to match the threshold of each of the categories in the label. And you see the huge improvement that was realized over the 10 years period, the first 10 years period in Europe. So other rationale for using standard in labeling, it's allowing government to impose performance requirement instead of focusing on prescription of specific technology. So you let the market react, but you impose a performance requirements. We see that standard in labeling is spreading quite rapidly over the last 15 years in several countries. So there's a lot of work actually for harmonization of country schemes, regional approach, and we see that countries that doesn't react right now and doesn't introduce standard and label have the high risk of becoming dumping grounds for low efficiency product from manufacturers that still produce cheap and inefficient products. And that's standard and labeling have another advantage. They can, it's relatively easy to measure and verify the savings of those type of technology. Here we see a curve that just illustrates how the standard and labeling work in the market. So here you have the first curve that is almost a normalized or normal curve, statistical normal curve, and that shows the reaction of manufacturer without standard or labeling in the market. This second curve shows the introduction of standard, where you have the blue line representing the threshold by the regulations. So after introduction of the regulation, of course, you don't find any more product below the blue lines. And you see a small shift in the curve shape toward higher efficiency models. But still, if you introduce or if you combine standard with labeling, that is this third line, which is dotted, you will see that the curve will shift to the right. So you will have a higher penetration of higher efficiency product in the market, combining the different regulations, standard and labeling together. Here, still on the rationale, we have a research that have been conducted by Dr. Meyers in the US around 2004, comparing the cost of delivering energy savings compared to various type of productions available in the market. And you see that standard and labeling have the potential to deliver savings at about 1/3 of the production cost of new kilowatt hours in the market. So that's one of the large or important rationale for the introduction of those regulations. Let's have a look now at the implementation steps. So the introduction of standard and labeling follow the following sequence. First, you work on the definition of the overall scheme. You organize testing capability, create a new testing capability, or organize with existing capability, laboratory. Then in parallel, you can design program, define standards, and prepare communication and marketing campaign. Then you go through the implementation stage with program enforcement and verification of integrity. You will evaluate those programs to get feedback that will just allow you to refine your program in the second stage. So you have to think about standard and labeling not as a punctual activity, but as something that is continuous and should be improved over time. So let's look at the different steps. First, the overall scheme. Here we are interested to, before even starting, to think about the cultural elements, the political condition and context, and the institutional capability that we have in country. All those factors are very important to take into consideration when designing a standard and labeling scheme. It's also very important to establish a strong and clear political legitimacy for standards. So that means generally making some projection of what would be the impact of standard and labeling introduction over the baseline. Then you decide some important elements about the big picture. So are you going to rely on existing testing facilities or test facilities located abroad? Are you going to develop your own test procedure for energy efficiency level, or you will use international procedure? Are you going to adopt a regional label design or country label design? So in fact, you're looking here at a very high level at the most important elements in order just to start the process. Second step will be to access data or assess data that will be needed for program development. So there's a lot of market research that is needed. You need to understand what is the quantity of product, the stock existing on the market. So how many product of each type exist in the household. So that means very often a study for penetration level of different equipments. You need also to know quite well what is the current efficiency level. So what is your baseline and what is the trend expected from manufacturer and the retailers before the introduction of the programs. Then you will screen and select the type of product that you want to introduce first. So which one are the highest priority? And you see here on the bottom the equipment that several countries consider first for introduction. So refrigerator, freezer, clothes washer, so all the white appliances generally are good candidates for development of standard and labeling policies and regulations. Then we look at the testing procedure. So basically, I would say the trend now is more and more to adopt testing procedure from international body, either ISO or other GEC or other international organization that develop testing procedure. But still, you have to consider the context in which they will be implemented. So is it coherent with the local conditions, so the temperature of operation, the time of operations, and you must consider, if needed, adjustment to the testing procedure to take local condition into consideration. So it's a balancing act here between the precisions of the testing procedure and the complexity and the regionalization also. What is also quite important is to ensure that you have a list of accredited laboratories that will participate in the standard and labeling program. So you must be sure that they have the capability and equipment to be able to deliver accurate results on each testing. Different approach can be considered here. You can use existing testing center, or you can build new facility for testing some specific equipment like refrigerator, freezers into an existing laboratory. You can decide with neighboring countries to create a new regional laboratory and share the cost, because those laboratories are quite expensive to construct. You can decide that your scheme will be to send some equipment abroad for testing, or you can decide that laboratory in country of manufacture could be accredited to test product before shipment. So at the bottom you have the example here of Tunisia, where they decided to construct their own facility. So the one that is shown here is for refrigerator. That was the first one that was implemented in the country for supporting standard and labeling operation. So here they decided to incorporate this new laboratory within the CETIM. CETIM was already a national institution that was performing safety tests for electrical products, so they had the capacity, know-how, and infrastructure to accept this new facility. Another important element is the design of the label itself. So here you have different elements to consider, like the type of product that should be covered, the type of label. We already discussed about endorsement versus comparative label. Is there interaction? Is it possible in some countries to combine endorsement and comparative label? Or doing even like in South Korea, they have incorporated something that is quite innovative. They incorporated the endorsement label for bad products. So product with very low efficiency must put in addition to the comparative label a special sticker saying this is really a bad product. Should be aware. So that's something that is innovative and creative, and that's type of things that should be considered when designing. Then you have to consider if the label scheme will be mandatory, voluntary. Label design is something that will take some time, and you must take the time and resource needed to develop a label that will really talk to you, to the population, so taking into consideration all the cultural context. Here at the bottom, we see an example of development of a label that was effort realized in China. So in China, they realized a lot of research, market research, including focus group with customers to determine what type of label should be implemented. So at the left, you see here a label that is clearly designed, taking into consideration cultural element. So you have the lotus leaf that is that was considered as base graphic or elements for the label. Then you have different alternative design on the right. Slightly different, but it's more a type of label that is used in the Southeast Asia. Finally, China decided to retain a label. I think it's the first one process. Then you move on to the determination of the objective for your program. So, and for each objective, you will have some effect or some consideration for your program. So let's say one of the common objectives is to eliminate inefficient model from being produced locally. So several programs have this target. So that means you will have to consider what could be or what will be the impact of the new regulation on the local manufacturer. Are they able to cope with the change, or are you going to force them to shut down their operation, which can bring interesting political discussions? Is your objective is to prevent inefficient product import? So again, that will have impact on the distributor and importer. So maybe they need some capacity building. They need to be aware where they can find more efficient product in the market. Do we want to stimulate local manufacturer or provide them support to design better product? That could be also an objective of the program. And the same for distributor. Do we want to help them to import efficient equipment? So each time we fix an objective, we have to reflect this into our program design in one or several components of activity to support the market transformation that is needed. Moving on in the implementation steps, we go to the analysis that is required to support the development of the standard and labeling scheme. And here we'll be looking at engineering analysis, market analysis, national impact analysis, consumer analysis, and manufacturer analysis. All those stakeholders and elements should be taken into consideration. In terms of engineering analysis, what you will do very often, you will try to determine what is the optimum equipment that can be bring into the market, and that's usually based on life cycle cost. So here you see an example of research that has been done in Tunisia, where you see at the left the baseline product. So that's the product that is inefficient initially before the introduction of the standard and labeling, and that costs a certain level. Here we just normalize the cost, so it's unity, so initial cost. Then for each point on the curve here, that's represent technological advance. So we just test different improvement to the product, and we look at the resulting efficiency on the x-axis, and we plot that against relative cost over the life of the product. So it's both capital cost, so purchasing the product, and operating the product, so energy cost. At some point you will see a minimum point on the curve. And that's really something that is very interesting to analyze, because it gives you a clue of where you can implement your minimum performance standard, or what is optimum for a market. Moving to the market analysis, I already mentioned that knowing the market baseline, the type of product, the efficiency of the market is something that is really important at the beginning of the program design. But again, you have to think into these kind of policies, standard and labeling, as a continuous policy. So you should put in place market analysis activities on a continuous basis. And you see here at the right the example of European Union market research, where about every year during a 10 years period, there has been market research just to track what was the evolution of the product. So we see the red curve or the red bar here that represent the market structure before the introduction of the labeling scheme and standard MIPS, and the green bar that represent 10 years after introduction of the scheme. And you see clearly the shift in the distribution of product amongst classes, A, B, C, D, etc. National impact analysis is another very important information that needs to be conveyed to political leaders. So generally what you do is creating a models. There's already some models that I will discuss in a few slides existing on the market, but that can give you a national picture of what is expected from a program in terms of greenhouse gases reductions, billing, cost reductions for energy used by appliance and energy efficiency or energy using products, and other information like capital cost investment required to materialize the savings. Consumer analysis is quite important. You need to think about the economic impact of the regulation on the consumer. So that includes the effect on purchase and operating costs. So the life cycle costs basically take care of this element. But you need to think also about the cash flow elements for the consumer. So the willingness to pay for higher efficiency equipment, or not only the willingness, in fact, it's also the capability of the household to pay for better equipment. We need to think about the awareness of the people about the technology, what they know. Is it an important factor also for them? So all this will have to be factored when developing communication campaigns. So very often consumer research is done either by telephonic survey or even door-to-door visit if you want to combine that activity with saturation study for product in household. Then you pursue your research on the manufacturing side. So you want to understand quite well before the introduction of the standard what will be the impact on the manufacturer. And second question is, are they able to adapt to the change without support? Sometimes some change coming from regulations can bring huge capital cost requirement for manufacturer. One of the classical cases is the refrigerator, where if you request high efficiency for refrigerator, at some point the manufacturer will have to change the mold used to manufacture the plastic case of the refrigerator, so to accommodate for additional thickness of insulations. And just purchasing a mold is something around 200,000 euro or 250,000 euros. Quite significant, and it implies also other change to the manufacturing line. And you need to understand really those changes that will take place in the market and how the manufacturer can adapt. Sometimes manufacturer doesn't know where they can find the best compressor in the market or the most cost-effective compressor in the market. So just an activity to provide them with capacity building and support in these initial stage of introduction of standard and labeling could be really effective to help them to go through these problems. We have to assess the impact of standard and labeling on profitability, growth, and competitiveness of the industries. And you can even predict that some of the manufacturers will not make it through the introduction of the standard and labeling. And we have seen that arriving in different countries. And at some point, you have to consider, or you have to take into consideration that you will face some political pressure because of plant closure in the market. And that's something that is one of the reality of standard and labeling introductions. Stakeholder involvement, very important to maintain contact with the stakeholder during all the process of development and introduction of standard. You have to listen to the reaction of the market. You have to listen to their concern. Very often they will have a strong concern about the enforcement. Is the system will be strong enough to ensure that low cost and low efficiency product will be really eliminated from the market. And that's quite legitimate concern, and you have to be ready to answer those kind of concerns. Next step will be the promulgations, where you really write the regulation text, and you have to consider where it will fit in the overall regulatory framework. So very often, the standard and labeling are attached to either an energy efficiency law that have been promulgated in the market. Sometimes they are attached as a decree or sub-regulation to the main regulations. So you have to think about how this will be written and implemented. Fortunately, there is a lot of example of those regulations existing in the market, so you usually it doesn't start from scratch on those elements. You can take advantage of the experience of other countries. Communication and marketing is also one of the support activity that is absolutely required when you incorporate or when you're introducing standard and labeling. So customers have to understand what is the label exactly, what information they convey. Also, if you give a high visibility to the label, that will introduce a reaction from the manufacturer. The more they think that the consumer will use this information and consider the efficiency of the product when purchasing a new product, the more rapidly they will react and change their design and introduce new lines of more efficient product. So communication campaign is something that is, I would say, quite traditional, but it's important to support the campaign. So you have to think about the communication channels, so media mix you want to use for conveying the information to the customer. You have to create evaluation tools for your marketing campaign to get some feedback to see if people remember the advertisement, if they remember the message, have they been exposed, is there any confusion arriving from the message, and things like that. You will, of course, like in several communication campaigns, want to pre-test all the elements or material that you will be using. And you want also to evaluate and refine your campaigns based on customer response and research. I already mentioned program enforcement and integrity as being one of the main concerns of manufacturer when you introduce. And that's something that you must pay attention. So you must be sure that you have enough resource. And I'm talking here about human and financial resource to ensure the enforcement and integrity of the whole scheme. Otherwise, it will bring problem. Like in some countries, we have seen very clever printing companies starting to sell high efficiency labels. So all the equipment that were found in retailer place were basically the highest efficiency that you can find anywhere in the world, even if it was a country in development. So that's a real risk that the program do not maintain the integrity, and you have to put in place monitoring activities. So that means the shops visits, ensuring that the label are really affixed to the product and that the good label are affixed on the corresponding products. You have to ensure that all actors in the market, so manufacturer, distributor, importers, comply with the regulations. And of course, just to ensure follow-up and support, you still need to maintain education and training activities over the years of introduction of the program. So bringing maybe more actors like consumer associations and environmental associations just to relay the message about the benefit of using higher efficiency product. And of course, you want to support the market by training for manufacturer, training for salesperson and consumers, and even for your institutions that will have to implement and ensure the integrity of the program. Evaluation is the last step, and that's where you will get your feedback about the effectiveness of your program. So that means gathering information, monitoring program performance. I already mentioned a couple of times that market research, so monitoring the change, the shift in the market proportions of different class of product efficiency in the market is quite important, but also the reaction from the population, the reaction from the manufacturer, all this must be factored into your analysis of program effectiveness. At some point, you have to determine if you need to make some adjustment, either to the test procedure, label redesign or adjustment. So at the bottom here, you see an example of label redesign that was due to evolution of the technology. So that's in European Union. The scheme started with ABC schemes, and over the years, the technology did improve. So it makes mandatory the introduction of better or more categories. So A+, A++, and A3+ were eventually added to the scheme. And that's an example of evolution of standard and labeling program over the time. You should, when you design the program, already think ahead and just start to determine what will be the period for reviewing your standard and labeling program. So a recent research that has been done in several countries in the world show that there is a huge variation in cycle. Some countries do the exercise only once, so they introduce the standard and labeling. Over the years, it becomes obsolete, but they don't update the whole scheme. So it can be 10 years, sometimes it's very long. 10 years, it's very long considering the rapid technological advance for some product. Something that is much more reasonable is around 2-3 years cycle for revision. Maybe 4 years could still be reasonable, but we are in a range that is relatively fast. So every 2 to 4 years, we must rethink our whole scheme and adjust and improve. And of course, as part of the evaluation, we'll report back to the government. At some point at the beginning of the process, we just raised the interest of the government with some nice projection about the potential impact. Now we are at the real fact. We want to demonstrate the real saving achieved over the time and the real market transformation achieved by those activities. In terms of timelines, we are talking about 2-3 years from cold start. Cold start means a country that have never done standard and labeling activities, so it will take a little bit more time just to get the concept grabbed by the different organization and stakeholder that needs to participate, organizing the testing laboratory or testing procedure. Of course, after the learning curve is behind you, you can accelerate the pace. So several countries, after the first few products, start to put in parallel different teams. So different teams will work on different products, and that will increase the throughput of additional standard and labeling regulation in the market. So several countries now has more than 30 products covered by those kind of schemes after several years of productions. So last word, I already mentioned several times that there was already a lot of experience existing, but there are several elements where you can use the experience from other countries, previous experience, to accelerate the pace at which you can deliver a standard and labeling program in the market. So market research have been done in several countries, so you can find a lot of information about survey forms and procedure. You can find testing procedure. The trend actually is to, in most countries, to use either ISO or regional testing procedure without modification, so that simplify and ensure harmonizations. You can work a lot or study legal framework that have been implemented in other countries that will give you a lot of information about the important elements that should be integrated in those pieces of legislations. Label class harmonization, the regional consideration also are something that can increase the speed of implementation of standard and labeling in specific countries, just harmonize with neighboring countries. Engineering models exist for a lot of product in the market, so you have, of course, to adjust the baseline and cost for your specific country condition, but that's something that can be done relatively fast. National models for supporting the policy can be done using public domain models like the PAM, which is produced by CLASP. So CLASP is an international organization working for disseminations of good practice for standard and labeling. So you can find them at www.clasponline.org. And I invite you to visit them if you want to start standard and labeling activity in your countries. There is a lot of free information, that a lot of experience available there, ready to share. Media mix, so you can learn a lot from successful experience from other countries, how they maximize the impact on the market while minimizing the cost for communication campaign, which could be one of the most important cost element in the introduction of a standard enabling program. Let's look at some at a real case study. So I replace here, I know we were mentioning Benin in the presentation, but I just replaced figure with Jordan, which have been done, it's a study that have been done some years ago, where 4 appliances were targeted, so fridge, freezer, washing machines, and AC units. So it was considered in this analysis that over 600,000 products in these 4 categories could be distributed or introduced in the market over a 4 years period. The savings of those 600,000 products over their lifetimes can bring 343 gigawatt hours of savings, 230 kilotons of CO2 abatement, so that's quite important, for a total of 28 million euro customer saving in energy bills. So that's the lifetime savings achieved by the customer, and for a 19 million incremental cost. So that means for the population, the introduction of those kind of standard and labeling can bring 9 million euro additional wealth to the society over the lifetime of the product, which is typically 8 to 10 years for most white appliances. So in conclusion, we can just reiterate that standard and labeling are one of the most effective policies if we consider the cost and the relatively low level of effort required to put that in place. So it's not zero in terms of effort. It takes resource, it takes money to our financial resource to implement those kind of programs. But if we consider the cost effectiveness compared to others' approach where you will provide subsidies to the market to change the type of equipment sold in the market or do resource acquisition program, standard and labeling is really one of the clear winner in the market. So don't underestimate the level of analysis and thinking that is required. So it's never a copy and paste effort to introduce standard and labeling, even if there's a lot of information and experience available. You have always to think about local condition and customization before implementing such a program. And last point, but still I just want to reiterate because it's really important. Just think of those regulations standard and labeling as a continuous effort. It's not a one deal, one shot effort. It's something that should be put as a sustainable development effort with continuous resource, human and financial resource to ensure their improvement and development as the market evolves. So thank you very much for listening. Then I think, Fernando, we start the question period from this point.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much, Pierre, for your interesting explanation today. Okay, great. So you can start submitting your questions through the Q&A window. In the meanwhile, I think we already got some initial comments, so let's go ahead with them. So the first comes from Innocent Ona. Sorry for mispronunciation, probably. Would you advise a different program design for large multicultural, multipolitical, multi-market country like Nigeria?
Yes, I already mentioned several times that cultural element was quite important to ensure the success. And we did mention at several places during the presentation, like the design of the label itself to be sure that different people with different culture understand the same message from the label. So that's things that are very important to customize from country to country. And of course, if you're talking about Nigeria and you have internally, I would say this problematic of multicultural inside the country, so it's not homogeneous. Yes, definitively, I will change the approach for the design, but keeping the same principles, but just widening the research element to be sure that we touch different cultural and political colors in the countries, and trying to see if we can find a common denominator that ensure the program success. But definitively, that's something that is a very good point to bring here, and it needs.
Okay, great. I think that following on the same note, the same person asks about the regulation. Does the regulation framework you speak of the same as legislation? If not, what legislative framework would you advise for a country like Nigeria? A legislation that could provide the enabling environment for both the manufacturer and the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. The only difference here between regulation framework and legislations, in fact, regulation framework just means we just try to understand how different pieces of legislation in the country will interact. Like just to give the example of Tunisia, when we started the program, we were just wondering, is it better to incorporate penalties into the standard and labeling regulation or rely on existing consumer regulations for the penalties? So that kind of interrelationship between different legislation in the country is quite important. And I would say that over the years, the main trend is that people try to incorporate in the standard and labeling regulation all the elements that is related, so including the penalties, because very often if you try to apply a consumer law article to the standard and labeling specific context, very often it's not so easy to have a perfect match. So I would say the trend for the last 10 years that I see more and more is that people prefer to incorporate specific article for enforcement inside the standard and labeling regulation instead of relying on other legislation already existing.
Mm-hmm. Good. Meanwhile, I allow me to remind that at the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I put in red the web address, which is http cleanenergysolutions.org, just below Pierre Baillargeon email contact. So the Clean Energy Solutions Center offers Ask the Expert service, which might be of your interest, innocent as well, probably policymaker or policies related in Nigeria. So there is certainly something to be explored at this level. So I invite you to go to these websites and hopefully be in touch with the services of Clean Energy Solutions to make progress on your well, particular plans. Good. So meanwhile, we receive other questions. So from Laura Carpenter, how do you minimize negative impact to local manufacturers while still setting desirable goals, especially if international efficiency standards are not yet achievable in that particular setting?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Laura. In fact, that's always a balancing act between the objective of the government. What we see in most countries is that the government want to go at one pace, relatively fast, to introduce a standard and labeling level, and the manufacturer, of course, react by requesting more time to adapt and more time also to develop. One of the frequent requests also that we see from manufacturers is that they don't want rapid change because for them they have a cycle to develop, design a product, put it in the market and recoup the investment for the new design that is generally let's say 3 to 4 years. So that's a frequent request from manufacturers to say if you change something or you change the threshold or anything, just let us time to introduce the new product and recoup our investment. Just don't change every 2 years. So I think that the answer, Laura, is that you need to maintain a close contact with the manufacturer to understand their concern and incorporate that into the design of your program. But that will be always a balancing act because I remember in some countries the discussion at some point were very tense because there was a lot of reaction from manufacturers, some of the manufacturers that were very vocal, but were also the people the less engaged to change their product or showing the less interest. So they were really backtracking. And at some point there has been, you have to try to accommodate them to some point, but at some point you have to just okay, that's enough. And even at some point, for some of the manufacturers that were really reacting a lot, they had no objective of changing their product in the market. So they were just trying to stop the process as much as they can or to delay the process, but they had no intentions to invest for improving their product. So at some point, the government have to take a decision and say, okay, that means we close this particular plant, and we just go ahead. So that's a delicate exercise to maintain the balance between the negative impact on manufacturer and the government objective, and it has to be ruled out on a case-by-case basis. So there's no general approach except communications and realization that at some point communication cannot solve all the problems.
Okay, thank you. So next question from Alessandro Casoli. Would the labeling approach be different for, sorry, I'm sending the question. Would the labeling approach be different for a building's labeling program? for instance, the EU Energy Performance Certificates and Display Energy Certificates?
Yeah, it will be somewhat different because building labeling, in fact, building labeling is more complex because you have so many components. Instead of having a single refrigerator, is relatively simple to test. You just put the refrigerator in the enclosure for 24 hours, then you get the figures about the energy efficiency level. For a building, it's much more complex than that, especially if you're working on the labeling scheme that will integrate both the envelope and the HVAC system and auxiliary equipment. So that means you need some kind of software tools that will allow you to determine what is the energy efficiency index of each building in the market. And that means also you will have to enroll other actors because it's what the laboratory is doing for a white appliance will have to be done by market actors. Most often it will be engineering firms that will use a software to submit the building design with the energy index for the building design to the authority. On the authority side, you will need to have, I would say, more in-depth technical capability to review the input that have been put into the software by the engineers to be sure that nobody tricks with the system. So that's much more complex to determine the energy index of buildings, and that's one of the main difference. And of course, the actors will not be the same also. When you're labeling buildings, your main actors will be the building owners or promoters that construct new buildings, and they are in relation with the final or people that will rent the buildings. But the dynamics is a little bit different here. You're not talking to a household, you're talking to commercial organizations with financial objectives. So hope this answers your question.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question from Kurt Seidel, sorry for pronunciation. Are there existing experiences with energy labels on industrial energy products?
That's a good question. I cannot provide too much of my own experience. My experience, I've been more in the white appliance or motors or HVAC product or building, but not on specific industrial product. The only experience that I have seen is air compressor. So air compressor can be labeled for their energy efficiency, and that's one of the auxiliary equipment. But when we come to the real core process, furnace, all kind of equipment that we can find in industrial environment, it's much more difficult to find a common metrics for testing those kind of equipment, and it's very difficult also to bring them into a laboratory conditions to test them on the same grounds, because very often different production line have slightly different products, final products with some side process. So it's very different from white appliance or motors or equipment that have a single purpose. Very often you have multiple variation of production lines for multiple type of industry. So it's much more difficult to apply labeling schemes for those kind of equipment. So doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but on my experience, I have never seen them in any countries.
Okay. On the same note, are there any CO2 levels in preparation for cook stoves?
Not sure what cook stove here for stove there is already energy label existing in several countries. Mm-hmm. So, but it's very often electric or gas cooking equipment. So I don't know if here it was referring to those kind of equipment, but yes, it exists as part of the white appliance products that are covered in several countries. And CO2 level depends. CO2 very often can be derived from, there's always a relationship between energy usage reduction and CO2, which is the emission factor. And that's something that is very often local because each country have their own mix of hydraulics and thermal and nuclear energy. And that will define the conversion factor between energy and CO2. But yes, there's a lot of discussion about convergence of energy label and CO2 labels or conveying both information on the same label.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I can imagine that all appliances using electricity, well, it depends on the generation mix of the country. So this might be not that easy to allocate a fixed CO2 reduction, as also the generation mix evolves in the time. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the same problem that the CDM or the Clean Development Mechanism have, how to establish the emission factor over time for a project that will generate CO2, say, emission reduction for the next 10 years or 3 period of 7 years, depending on what approach you select. You have exactly the same types of problematics.
Okay, great. Comments by Miguel Rubalcaba. Energy efficiency standards and levels work together to transform markets. In Mexico, the normas mínimas de desempeño energético, the objectives are to promote communication and cooperation between governments and energy sectors of the North America on issues of common interest and improve trade and energy interconnections, Canada, US, Mexico. Harmonization has not been easy. Well, I think this is rather a comment.
It's more a comment. I don't see the question mark, but thanks, Miguel, for sharing your experience. It's true that the more countries try to collaborate, the more difficult could be the harmonization issue. So in fact, we see again for the international negotiation on climate change, you bring so many countries together with so many different perspectives that it's very difficult to get to a common denominator. But still, I think there is a lot of things that needs to be done in terms of harmonization if we want to avoid difficulty in interpreting efficiency of different products on the market. And that's very present right now. Let's say recently I was working on a global study on air conditioning, and we see clearly that the U.S. way of testing equipment bring one metrics in the market. The European Union use their own set of testing procedure for air conditioning equipment, and the same for Japan or GEC. So, and that's not easy to harmonize the results of those different metrics in the market, and that's create confusion. So I was also in Tanzania last year, where they had product coming from Asia, from Europe for energy efficient motors, and they were tested according to different testing procedures. So that bring different value for efficiency that customer can compare or try to compare, but they don't realize that they are not equal. They come from different testing procedure, and they cannot be compared on the equal ground.
Okay, we have interesting comments by Andrew Karua from Kenya. So we are implementing a Rationale program here in Kenya. We are yet to get at the standards and levels, but think we need to do public awareness campaign. We're worried that we will start the campaign and get an avalanche of questions we can't deal with because we are yet to put the standards in place. This may also cause public apathy when we have the SL and ready for awareness.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, yeah, I haven't seen too often, in my experience, a country where they start the communication, except general communication about the fact that it's better to use high efficiency equipment. Starting to advertise the label itself when it's not already on the equipment in the distribution point of sales, that that could be yeah, something that can bring a negative reaction because you're just too much ahead. Maybe there's things that can be done, just saying it's coming, watch next year for this new labeling that will inform you. But I'm not sure that it's too much efficient because people doesn't remember. The memory effect doesn't stand very long in communication campaigns. So after 2-3 months, you pretty much lost the effect. So if you just advertise 1 year for something coming next year, most of the chance people will start to forget about it. Maybe you can go with a general message about energy efficiency product or something that is desirable, but without, I would say, burning the label too fast before it's already mandatory and in place. In other countries, they have worked with pilot experience, so they started communication during the pilot campaign. But in order to increase the visibility of the product, they organize point of sales events. So where during Saturday and Sunday, let's say there's 2 days where they give T-shirts and things like that, and they organize kind of fair or event, and that increased the visibility, and the label is there because, of course, for the point of sales operation, all the equipment in the store have the label, and the journals can participate in the events. You do some public relations, so there's a way maybe to organize things if you want to start communication prior to the actual introduction. But I would be careful doing that.
Okay, very well. So I think we covered all the questions coming today. So many thanks for your participation. Thank you, Pierre, for your comprehensive presentation and explanations. And then, well, let's meet